The blinding expanse of the Siberian tundra stretched out like a bleak, overcast void under a frozen sky, a place where nothing should have existed except ice and wind. Yet cutting through the pristine white landscape was a jagged scar of scorched earth, leading directly to a mangled, futuristic shape, half buried in the deep snowpacks. It looked less like an airplane and more like an alien spacecraft, glinting with a dark titanium sheen under the weak Arctic sun. When Soviet border guards cautiously approached the wreckage, they realized they had stumbled upon a ghost that defied the laws of conventional aerodynamics. There was no cockpit, no pilot, and no markings to identify its origin, only the unmistakable aura of ultra-advanced, terrifying engineering. Thousands of miles away, inside the reinforced concrete walls of the Pentagon and the heavily guarded corridors of Langley, a sudden, suffocating panic gripped American intelligence officials as they realized a nightmare scenario had just become reality. The United States had lost its most closely guarded, highly classified technological marvel, a machine built to spy on the world's most dangerous nuclear regimes, and it had fallen directly into the hands of the Soviet Union. To understand how a piece of America's most secretive aerospace technology ended up rotting in the Soviet wilderness, the history must be traced back to an era when the world stood on the razor-thin edge of total annihilation. The 1960s were a time of desperate paranoia, where information was the ultimate weapon, and the United States had long relied on the legendary U-2 spy plane to peer behind the Iron Curtain and capture high-altitude photographs of Soviet missile sites. However, on May 1st, 1960, that illusion of invulnerability shattered into a million pieces when a Soviet surface-to-air missile tore through the sky near Sverdlovsk, bringing down Kiev pilot Francis Gary Powers. The message from Moscow was deafeningly clear that American pilots could no longer violate Soviet airspace with impunity, creating a catastrophic intelligence vacuum for the Central Intelligence Agency and the United States Air Force. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, and later John F. Kennedy, demanded a solution that could bypass Soviet air defenses without risking an international incident over captured pilots, forcing the military to turn to the most secretive, radical aerospace design hub in the world. The call went out to Lockheed's Advanced Development Programs, better known by its mythical codename, the Skunk Works, led by the legendary and uncompromising engineering genius, Clarence Kelly Johnson. Johnson and his team were already deep in the shadows developing the A-12, a colossal titanium spy plane capable of flying at 3 times the speed of sound, which would eventually evolve into the iconic SR-71 Blackbird. But Kelly Johnson knew that even the Blackbird, as revolutionary as it was, had a vulnerability because it still required a human being to fly it. Deep within the windowless drafting rooms of Burbank, California, Johnson conceived an idea so far ahead of its time that many within the military establishment thought it was pure science fiction. He envisioned a parasitic, unmanned reconnaissance drone that would be launched from the back of a supersonic mothership, accelerate to speeds exceeding Mach 3.3, climb to an astonishing altitude of over 90,000 feet, and photograph enemy targets without a single human life at stake. This classified project was given the codename Project Tagboard, and the drone itself was designated as the D-21, a marvel of pure engineering constructed almost entirely out of titanium to withstand the blistering friction-induced heat of hypersonic flight. It possessed no landing gear, no cockpit, and absolutely no room for error. Designed for a singular, terrifyingly precise trajectory where it would fly a pre-programmed route over the enemy's most heavily defended airspace. After capturing its images, the D-21 would drop its highly sophisticated camera package via parachute over the open ocean for mid-air recovery, and then automatically self-destruct, leaving no trace of its existence for the enemy to find. The development of this radical machine took place under a shroud of absolute secrecy at the newly established, highly classified testing grounds of Area 51 in Nevada. To carry this futuristic drone to its launch speed, the Skunk Works modified two A-12 airframes into a variant known as the M-21, creating a massive mothership that carried the D-21 drone on a centerline pylon between its twin vertical stabilizers. The engineering challenges of Project Tagboard were monumental because to ignite the drone's revolutionary Mach ramjet engine, the mothership had to accelerate to Mach 3, where the air rushing over the fuselage created a violent, turbulent vortex. Kelly Johnson himself was plagued by doubts about the launching mechanism, noting in his private logs that it was the most dangerous aerodynamic problem he had ever encountered in his storied career. But the pressure from Washington was relentless. On October 16, 1964, the geopolitical landscape violently shifted when Communist China successfully detonated its first atomic bomb at the remote Lop Nor test site, catching the Western intelligence community dangerously off guard. Washington was suddenly desperate to know how advanced the Chinese nuclear program truly was. But Lop Nor was located so deep within the Chinese mainland that no conventional spy plane could reach it without being shot down, thrusting the experimental D-21 to the forefront of American national security strategy. Before the drone could be sent into the heart of a hostile communist superpower, the Skunk Works team had to prove that this radical machine could actually be launched without destroying itself and its crew. The early flight tests of Project Tagboard at Area 51 were fraught with tension, conducted by an elite group of test pilots who knew that any mistake meant instant death at Mach 3. The first 3 launch attempts managed to achieve successful separation, proving that the ramjet could ignite and propel the drone away. But Kelly Johnson's engineering intuition continued to warn him of a fatal flaw in the design. On July 30th, 1966, over the Pacific Ocean, those warnings culminated in a catastrophic disaster when the M-21 mothership initiated a launch sequence at Mach 3.2 at 72,000 feet. As the drone released from the pylon, unseen aerodynamic forces trapped it in the mothership's boundary layer, causing the D-21 to pitch down violently, striking the M-21 and tearing the massive aircraft completely apart. Through sheer instinct, both pilot Bill Park and Launch Systems Officer Ray Torek managed to eject from the disintegrating aircraft at hypersonic speed. But tragedy struck when Torek's flight suit took on water in the ocean, causing him to drown before rescue teams could arrive. The loss of Torek devastated Kelly Johnson and effectively ended the M-21 launch program, But the American government's hunger for intelligence on China's nuclear program had only grown more ravenous. The engineers at Skunk Works were forced to completely reinvent the launch system, abandoning the dangerous hypersonic mothership concept and turning to the reliable B-52H Stratofortress bomber. The drone was modified into a new variant, designated the D-21B, which required a massive, solid-fuel rocket booster attached to its underbelly to accelerate it to Mach 3 after being dropped from the subsonic bomber. This new configuration changed the entire operational dynamic of the program, which was renamed Project Senior Bowl and moved to Beale Air Force Base in California. The B-52s would carry two D-21B drones over the vast expanses of the Pacific Ocean, preparing for a mission that would push the absolute limits of automated technology in an era before microprocessors or GPS existed. By late 1969, after several mixed test flights where some drones performed flawlessly and others plummeted into the ocean due to technical failures, President Richard Nixon gave the ultimate authorization for the D-21B to go to war. The plan was for a B-52 to take off from Guam, fly under the cover of darkness toward the coast of China, and release the D-21B over the South China Sea, where its rocket booster would blast it into the stratosphere toward Lop Nor. On November 9, 1969, the first operational mission, codenamed Mission 501, commenced as the B-52 reached its launch point and dropped the D-21B into the dark abyss. The massive rocket booster ignited with a blinding flash, illuminating the clouds as it blasted the drone into the stratosphere, where it flew flawlessly across thousands of miles of hostile territory to photograph the Chinese missile program. Back at the command center, intelligence officials waited in agonizing silence for the drone to exit Chinese airspace and drop its film capsule near Taiwan. But the tracking ships encountered nothing but empty skies. The D-21B had completely vanished, and while the Americans assumed it was lost forever at the bottom of the ocean, its rudimentary inertial guidance system had actually suffered a critical electronic malfunction over the target. Instead of executing its sharp turn back toward the Pacific, the drone simply kept flying straight, roaring over China, crossing the Mongolian border, and continuing its relentless journey north into the deeply defended, ultra-sensitive airspace of the Soviet Union until its fuel ran dry and it crashed silently into the remote, snow-laden forests of Siberia. Inside the heavily fortified headquarters of the Soviet Air Defense Forces, a mixture of intense shock and profound exhilaration filled the air as military analysts realized that the wilderness of Siberia had delivered a pristine specimen of America's most classified aerospace technology. The wreckage of the D-21, despite its high-speed impact, was remarkably intact because the frozen ground and heavy snowbanks of the Siberian forest had cushioned its final descent and preserved its structural integrity. Soviet recovery teams painstakingly dismantled the craft, packed its components into heavily guarded crates, and transported them under maximum security to the legendary Tupolev Design Bureau on the outskirts of Moscow. The arrival of the American drone sent shockwaves through the Soviet scientific community, where engineers led by brilliant minds marveled at the flawless welds on the exotic titanium skin, and examined the revolutionary Mach ramjet engine. Most intriguing of all was the drone's radar-absorbent coatings and its smooth, blended wing-body design, which offered an early, tantalizing glimpse into the emerging science of stealth technology. The Soviet leadership immediately recognized an unprecedented opportunity, issuing a top-secret decree to reverse engineer the American drone and build a Soviet counterpart that could penetrate the airspace of the United States and its NATO allies. This ambitious project was given the official code name Voron, meaning raven, and for months, the finest minds in Soviet aerospace worked in round-the-clock shifts to replicate the complex analog guidance systems and chemical paint compositions. The Voron was envisioned as a long-range, supersonic reconnaissance drone that would be launched from the back of a modified Tupolev Tu-95 Bear bomber or the newly developed 160 supersonic strategic missile carrier. The Soviets were making rapid progress, using the stolen American blueprint as a shortcut through years of expensive, dangerous research and development. But as they dove deeper into the heart of the D-21's design, they ran into the exact same insurmountable problems that were currently plaguing their counterparts across the Atlantic. While the Soviets were busy copying the ghost of Mission 501, the United States military, completely unaware of the Siberian discovery, was forging ahead with Project Senior Bowl under the belief that the first mission's failure was simply an isolated telemetry error. On December 16th, 1970, more than a year after the first disappearance, they launched Mission 502, and this time the navigation system held true as the drone soared over Lopnor and successfully gathered its intelligence. However, as the recovery capsule decoupled from the drone and drifted down on its parachute over the ocean, the waiting C-130 Hercules recovery aircraft missed the mid-air catch, causing the valuable film container to sink to the bottom of the sea before a recovery ship could reach the coordinates. 2 missions had resulted in 2 catastrophic failures, leaving intelligence commanders desperate, but still refusing to quit the program. On March 4th, 1971, Mission 503 was launched, and the D-21B performed its hypersonic dance over China, navigated perfectly, and returned to the recovery zone where a C-130 crew successfully snagged the capsule in mid-air. There was brief celebration in Washington, but when the film was rushed to the darkrooms at Langley, the results were deeply disappointing because the camera had suffered a partial malfunction during the flight, leaving the images blurry and of limited intelligence value. The final blow to the program came on March 20th, 1971, during Mission 504, when the drone suffered a catastrophic failure of its flight control system over Chinese territory and plummeted into the remote forests of the Yunnan province. The Chinese military quickly located the wreckage, revealing to Beijing that the United States was flying unmanned, hypersonic ghosts through their airspace, which caused immediate political fallout in Washington. The risk-to-reward ratio of Project Senior Bowl had finally tipped into unacceptable territory, prompting the Nixon administration to officially cancel the D-21 program in July 1971. The remaining airframes were quietly packed away into crates, covered in tarp, and shipped to the military aircraft boneyard at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, forbidden from ever seeing the light of day again. Meanwhile, inside the Tupolev Design Bureau in Moscow, the Soviet Voron project was meeting an identical, sudden demise, because Soviet engineers realized that the cost of mass-producing titanium components and single-use ramjet engines was astronomical. Furthermore, the rapid advancement of a new technology was making both the American and Soviet hypersonic drone programs completely obsolete, as new generations of digital spy satellites were being placed into stable orbits, offering high-resolution, real-time imagery without ever violating national airspace or risking highly expensive hardware. For over 20 years, the story of the D-21 that crashed in Siberia remained one of the Cold War's most closely guarded secrets, hidden behind a wall of classification on both sides of the ocean, until the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. In a final, ironic twist of historical fate, during a post-Cold War diplomatic visit, Russian aviation officials presented their American counterparts with a gift containing a piece of the original wreckage from Mission 501, recovered from the Siberian snow all those years ago. It was the first time the United States government officially confirmed where their lost drone had actually gone, closing the loop on a machine born too early that served as an analog pioneer in a digital world. Today, the surviving D-21 drones sit silently in museums across America, looking just as futuristic now as they did 60 years ago, standing as quiet monuments to an era of desperate genius when the forgotten ghost in the Siberian snow changed the course of secret warfare forever.